Today you'll meet Kelly and her husband Danny. Through some poor choices, Kelly was once in the difficult situation of being an unmarried mother. Kelly has a number of experiences, both good and bad, but today she has some very helpful insights to help us with this sensitive topic that's becoming a bigger and bigger part of our national scene every day.
Welcome to Hope for Life's Journey.
Hello, I'm Randy Beckton, and welcome to Hope for Life's Journey, a special presentation of the Herald of Truth Ministries. Today, we're talking about the difficult lives and situations of unmarried women who are struggling to raise their children. What do you think of when someone points to a teenage girl and says, yes, she's a mother, but she's not a wife? I'm afraid that negative impressions are very easy for you and me. But what would Jesus say in this situation? Hopefully, our discussion today will help all of us become more like Jesus in how we respond to people like Kelly. Now, to lay a biblical foundation for our discussion today, I want to share with you some important insights from a class session called Women in Crisis, taught by Bible teacher Dale Pauls. Let's take a look.
Do you remember how the Gospel of Matthew begins to tell the story of Jesus? How Matthew begins with this thing called a genealogy. You know, so-and-so was the father of so-and-so, who was the father of so-and-so, and it goes on 42 times, and we tend to just skip over that and assume that the book was really meant to begin with verse 18. But of course, back then, people loved to know who a person's father was, and grandfather, and great-grandfather, and it wasn't really that long ago in America when people cared about those things. But if we read this list a little more closely, we will start to see something else is happening, something very interesting. Discredited women in this long list of men, women in trouble. There are 4 of them. There's Tamar in verse 3, who prostituted herself with her father-in-law Judah. There is Rahab in verse 5, whose occupation was the town whore. There is Ruth, who, in the same verse, who spent that night out at the threshing floor of Boaz at his feet and then left before daybreak. And then finally, in verse 6, there is Uriah's wife, the adulteress Bathsheba. And Matthew is oh so subtly reminding us that the story he is telling us is woven out of real life. And this means that it's woven out of scandal, and it's woven out of shame, and it's woven out of female crisis. And now the same thing is happening. In the village of Nazareth, up in Galilee, a young woman named Mary, comes to her betrothed, a man named Joseph, to explain that she is pregnant, and she says that she is with child by the Holy Spirit. Now, Joseph hasn't heard that one before. He's a good man. He's a kind man, but he wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't know quite what it is until an angel appears to him to confirm the truth of Mary's story. But that's how the life of Jesus begins. It begins in female crisis. Maybe that's why Jesus always had a special understanding of women in trouble, had a special place in his heart for them. One day, this story does come from John, the 7th chapter, verse 53 through chapter 8, verse 11, and I'm contemporizing it a bit. But one day, Jesus was in the temple, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, and I kind of picture them dressed in power suits, and they dragged in a woman, and I kind of picture her with a skirt too short and a blouse cut too low and her hair disheveled, and they drag her in before Jesus. She's been caught in adultery, which is some kind of sex with a man to whom she is not married, which apparently this time she was engaged in entirely by herself. Well, I suppose not, but where's the guy? Where's the guy in this picture? Why do the guys always get off? Anyway, the law teachers make the woman stand up before the group, and they say to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded that such women should be stoned. Now, what do you say? And from a purely legal standpoint, the law teachers are, of course, correct. They usually are. And they hope that they can skewer Jesus on the horns of a dilemma. If Jesus counsels forgiveness, he is in direct conflict with the law of Moses. But if he counsels death. Then he loses his reputation for mercy, and he loses his drawing power with sinners. So what does he do? Well, the text says that he bends down, he begins writing on the ground. We don't quite know what he was doing. Maybe he was buying time. Maybe he was calling the accuser's sins attention to them, calling attention to their lust and their sexuality out of control and their falseness. Maybe he's writing, "Where's the guy?" We don't know for sure, but then he straightens up and says, "Yes, if any of you is without sin, let him be the first one to cast the stone." And he goes back to writing on the ground. Jesus is essentially saying to the Pharisees, yes, you may stone her, but only if you have never wanted to do the same thing yourself. You see, the qualification for judgment is not just knowledge, it's moral credibility before God. And when the force of Jesus' words struck home, the accusers were no longer interested in her sin, but they were interested in their own, and they walked away one at a time, the older ones first, until it was only Jesus left with the woman. And now we see Jesus' approach to one who is caught red-handed in sin. Now maybe at that point he's talking to me. I think he is. Maybe he's talking to you. But what he does first is to lift the situation from the purely legal to the truly moral, to what is happening in real life. And he gives this challenge to the woman, go now and leave your life of sin. Now he offers no easy forgiveness, no cheap grace. Really, he's offered no forgiveness at all. He offers nothing that encourages self-destructive behavior. And he does something, well, he identifies the sin, but then he does something that we hardly ever do. He neither condemns nor condones. Now, we are driven by some inner need, I guess, for tidiness, to do one or the other. We either condemn, and if we cannot condemn, then we condone. But I want you to notice how Jesus, with perfect peace of mind, does neither. He asks, has no one condemned you? Then neither do I condemn you. Because he knows that this woman's story is an unfinished story. And what he offers is a second chance. Go and make a new start. You can start over. You really can. Now I want to say a word to single mothers, to mothers never married. I want to talk about love, and I want to talk about the unnamed hunger that drives us, and to say that the church must share the blame with you. You may remember those lyrics from a Broadway musical called Aspects of Love. Love changes everything, how you live and how you die. Love changes everything. It brings you glory. It brings you shame. Love makes fools of everyone. All the rules we make are broken. Yes, love changes everything. Love will never let you be the same. Physical love is perhaps the most intense, the most exquisite, the most powerful, instinctive pleasure known to a human being. And too often the church has had nothing constructive to say about it. We just deny it or we denounce it. The Bible is consistently open and frank in its dealing with sexuality, but often the church has not done likewise. And the truth is this, and this is something that you may have never heard before, but there is a strong connection between sexuality and spirituality. Now, at first that comes as a shock to us because we usually think of them as being opposites. But both sexuality and spirituality rise out of a sense of our own incompleteness, out of a hunger for our lost wholeness, out of a search for the other half of us. Both represent a yearning for God. And you need to know that in our sexuality, in our intense longing for intimacy, to be adored, to be wrapped up in a love that we can completely trust, we are looking for God. It is the cry of the creature for its creator. But the mistake comes when you mistake your lover on earth for God. That's when the mistake comes and you expect him to satisfy you. If you put that kind of pressure on the relationship, And you know what happens? Even the relationship shatters. Meanwhile, God wants from us the emotions, the energy, the passion, the hunger that we usually reserve for our sexuality. The psalmist can cry, "As the deer pants for streams of living water, so my soul pants for you, O God," Psalm 42. Panting for God. You see, God does not just want from us just our book learning. He does not want from us just our dogged household chores. Is that what you want from a lover? But the ultimate beloved is God, and it's only God. And these emotions, which are the most intense of all, the most human of all, must be honored and exalted and glorified. They create a God-given zone in which life is at its most intense. But the ultimate beloved has to be God, and only He can satisfy the hunger within us. And so Jesus looks into the eyes of the woman in crisis, and He says, "I believe in you. I know that you feel powerless. I know that you feel that your life is out of control. Well, why not start with that? Admit to God that you are powerless. Be boldly honest with your sins, with God, with yourself, and I'm going to suggest with at least one more person. I think that's the way it works best. Open your life up to the truth that God can heal you. It'll be just like starting over. It'll be like new life, a new birth, and stay in conscious contact with God. And then begin to take this message of healing to others and do it every day. You can do it. You really can. In later years, do you suppose that this woman thought that this was the worst day of her life? The degradation, the exposure, the public humiliation, or the best day of her life? What do you think? Well, it all depends on what she did with it, right? It all depends on what she did with her unfinished story.
Thanks to Dale Pauls for biblical truth in such a powerful and sensitive way. I want to welcome our guests to our studio audience today, Danny and Kelly Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you.
You've been married 6 months, and we could talk about the joys and the expectations of being newlyweds, and we will at some point. But today you're here for a very special reason. Kelly, you're 25 now, but something happened in your life at the age of 19 that you've been willing to share with us. Would you tell us that story, and then we'll bring Danny into this discussion.
Sure. Well, I was 19, and I come from a very stable two-parent family, Christian upbringing, very involved in the youth group when I was younger. Had some trouble in a relationship with my parents for a little while, very kind of rebellious. Never got into drugs or alcohol or anything like that, but I'm not sure what my problem was. I was just, I guess, searching for something. Suffered from some low self-esteem. In high school, got involved with a young man who kind of played off of that, just kind of beat me down even further. And my parents sent me off to college, and I dropped out after about 3 weeks and came home because I didn't want to be there. Got myself a job at a restaurant and started dating another person that also worked at this restaurant. During this time, I was continuing to have trouble at home with my parents. Ran away a couple of different times. One of the times that I ran away, didn't really have anywhere to go. And this young man that I happened to be dating at the time said, "Well, why don't you come stay with me for a couple of days?" And this was totally against everything that I'd ever been taught, anything that I believed. I didn't believe in living together, but I was kind of desperate and feeling very, very bad about myself. And with no place to go, I said, okay, well, it's just for a couple of days. Well, a couple of days turned into a couple of months, and we decided to get engaged and get married. While all of this was happening, I found out that I was pregnant. I was absolutely thrilled because at 19 and younger, I don't think I was living in reality. Having a baby is not changing diapers and getting up at 3 a.m. and feeding and responsible for doctor's appointments and things like that. When you're that young, I think having a baby is playing Barbie and having something to love you, which is absurd because a baby doesn't love you, a baby needs you, a baby comes to love you. It doesn't come out loving you.
Now, during that time, you felt bad about some of these decisions you were making, but did you just override them and keep right on going?
Well, sure. Once you're down, it's extremely hard to pull yourself back up. When you've gone against everything that you've ever known to be right, and you feel that you are totally wrong, it's very hard to get back right again.
So this boyfriend and you were expecting a child. Now, we're not talking about Danny. Danny comes into your life later, but
Correct.
Go ahead and tell us more of your story.
Well, we went to my parents hand in hand and said, I'm pregnant, and we're still getting married, and they were devastated, of course, but I was kind of doing my own thing, and what could you do? Many parents will say, well, I could control this, and I could do that, and I would tell this child. When a child really wants to rebel and really wants to go out on their own, then they do that, and I was very strong-willed, and that's what I did.
So you call this a period of rebellion, don't you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We went to them, said we were getting married. Everything was fine, and then he went to his parents alone. His parents were separated. His father was not quite what he should be as a father, and he went to his father first. His father said, you're 22, she's 19, y'all don't need this, leave her. You don't get on with your life. At that point, he maintained that we were still going to get married, and then he went to see his mother, and his father had apparently gotten to his mother first, and his mother basically had the same idea, you're 22, you don't need this, get out while you can, and make the best of the rest of your life. It's just a mistake. Go on.
So does he split and leave you at age 19 expecting a child?
Basically, yes. He decided that we weren't going to get married, that we could keep dating, but we weren't going to get married, and we would just see what happened. And I was not happy with that, obviously. I was the one that was struggling with this. I was the one that was facing everything, and I thought, no, you're going to be in this with me. And I was angry, and basically we ended up ending the relationship when I was about 4 months pregnant. He got involved with another girl, started dating her. He kept up with me, sent a little bit of money, a minimal amount of money for doctor bills and what have you, but nothing real substantial. Just kind of called, hi, how are you doing?
Now, this child was born, though. You
Right.
did have this child, right?
Correct.
Did it dawn on you at that time to start praying for this child that was not born? And at what point did that happen? Because you really have a deep interest in the spiritual welfare of your child.
I've always prayed, but I don't think that I was really convicted until kind of towards the end of my pregnancy. My mother is a very spiritual woman, and she had her army praying for me. And I think that is the only way that this situation turned out like it did. It was through lots of prayer and with God's help.
Let's go ahead and tell our audience his name's Joseph.
His name's Joseph.
And you adopted him out very carefully through some guidelines to a Christian family. I just have to ask you, Danny, you start dating this lovely person, and sometime early in your dating, she tells you, I'm a mother, but I'm not a wife.
I wasn't very judgmental. I mean, I grew up in a very conservative Christian home. I saw through the mistake and was delighted at her decision to have the baby and to put it up for adoption, and just everything that was how it was handled. It wasn't a scarlet letter to me. It was a Olympic medal for overcoming that obstacle.
I did a lot of thinking, and for being so immature, I'm amazed how these things just came to me, because I just kept thinking, okay, what if I have a boy and I don't ever marry an adequate role model? he won't know how to be an adequate role model. And the cycle will just keep going. And I didn't want to be responsible for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren not being brought up.
So you wanted to rear your children with a Christian husband
Right.
and father.
I wanted him to have at least what I had. And there was no way that was going to happen. I couldn't see the future. I couldn't see who I was going to marry. And as it turns out, my future would have been drastically different had I kept. But I couldn't, I didn't know what would happen. And I felt like the only way that I could guarantee that he would have a fighting chance in the world as it is today was to put him in a two-parent home.
Statistics tell us that more than 1 million girls are in the situation that you were in. The teenage girls, 1 million of them in our country, are pregnant with a child, going to give birth to a child, and there's no husband, there's no father in the picture. I asked you earlier if you would look to the camera and say a word of hope to someone who right now is making some decisions about this child they're carrying. They're making some decisions about where God may fit in their life now, whereas before he may not have fit in their life. Would you give a word of hope? I didn't ask you what you'd say, so we're all interested. What would you say to someone?
I think that the best thing that a girl can do is just concentrate on that baby and what that baby means to you and what that baby needs, and find it within yourself to pull yourself out of that situation, however you choose to do that, whether it's through adoption or through keeping your baby and making a home for it. Find out what resources can help you and do whatever is within your power to better your life, because you have the responsibility of another life now, and that's an awesome responsibility.
Who would like to ask the first question, to Kelly or to Danny?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for being courageous enough to come and share your story with other girls who are in the same problem. And I'd also like to ask you what advice you would give parents who have a teenage daughter that would help them know how to support her in the best way.
I think that the key to it is openness and having a good, strong relationship, being able to talk, not feeling, oh, if I tell mom and dad this, I'm going to get grounded or I'm going to get in trouble, or it's, the consequences of telling scare them. That I don't think that that's the way a family should work, because the consequences of not telling, not talking before it happens, not talking about sex, not talking about drugs or alcohol, whatever the situation is, not just with teen pregnancy, but any kind of struggles that young people go through today, those consequences in the end are much greater than what you might face telling a parent. Make yourself approachable, and then if you find yourself in a situation like this, communicate and be supportive. One thing that my family went through was my mother and I talked an awful lot, but afterwards I have an open adoption, and I would get pictures and things, and I would find that my dad felt like it was better that we not talk about it. We just don't talk about it because it'll upset Kelly. But what I needed to do was talk about it, and that's different for everybody. But and now it's an open subject in my home. Well, have you heard from Joseph lately? Well, no, I haven't. I think I need to maybe write them a letter here in a couple months or something. But that really helped. It's taken us 5 years to get to that point.
Would you respond if someone watching today wanted to correspond with you about a choice they're trying to make? Would you take that letter and respond to it?
Oh, of course.
I just feel like we need to do more with this. We've run out of time. I'm sorry that we can't do more. I want to thank you, Danny, and I want to thank you, Kelly, for coming on the program. Don't you thank them for their heart? There's nothing more beautiful and innocent than a little baby, especially when the little baby comes into a strong marriage. But you know and I know that our society thinks and communicates less and less about God, and that's going to result in more and more consequences of selfish desires. It's not surprising that we see then more of these beautiful little babies born to moms who may be very confused about God's purposes, and certainly to absentee dads. Christian people must lead out in helping unwed mothers. Christians must seek to be understanding and gentle and forgiving and supportive. And what you have here today in Danny and Kelly is a Christian couple committed to God, and they want to help people, women they meet, in the trouble that Kelly herself experienced. The truth is, we're all people needing help. We need a relationship with God our Father and with Jesus Christ, His Son. Now, this program comes to you through the contributions of members of Churches of Christ around the world, because we want to share that God has forgiven us and is forgiving us and helping us make good choices in our lives. We've put our lives under His control when we responded to Jesus Christ. So today, we want to hear from you, and we want to see you again next time on Hope for Life's Journey. Thank you.